Hello friends, in this lecture I will be talking about energy flow in ecosystem. In the previous lectures I had talked about the concept of ecosystem, and in the second lecture we have discussed about the components of ecosystem. We had also seen the different types of ecosystem. Now, to understand the further topics like the food web and the food chain and the ecological pyramids, first we have to understand a concept, and that is the energy flow in ecosystem. What I will do is that I will divide this lecture into three parts. In the first part, I will talk about the concept of energy, why energy is required and what is the source of energy. In the second part, I will talk about the laws of thermodynamics and how energy is flowing within the ecosystem. And in the third part, I will talk about a very important concept which is present while describing the flow of energy within the ecosystem. We will talk about the 10% rule or the 10% law. So, let's start with the first topic, the concept of energy. Now, a question may arise that what is the use of energy? So, why energy is required? So, I will write it over here, why energy is required. Why we need energy? Now, you can answer these questions because we all know that for every work we do, we require energy. So, we can say that energy is the capacity to do a work. So, I will write over here, energy is the capacity to do work. Now, like for example, I am talking, I am giving a lecture. So, I am requiring energy to do that process. For my respiration process which is going on, I require energy. Not only us, but all the biotic components of the ecosystem requires energy. What are the different processes for which we require energy? We require energy for, say, respiration. Energy is required for locomotion. Energy is required for metabolic processes. Energy is required even for reproduction. Energy is also required for growth. So, these are the very most important points for which energy is required. Now, we have to understand a fact that not only animals but plants also require energy. Whenever I say biotic components, we all know that the biotic component composed of autotrophs and the heterotrophs. Autotrophs means we are talking about mostly plants. So, as we animals require energy, plants also require energy to do all its different things for its respiration purpose, for all the metabolic processes which is going on. So, plants also require energy. Now, the question may arise, what is the source of energy? So, now we are talking about the source of energy. I will just clear this part. So, you have to remember why we require energy. Now we are talking about The second question, second most important questions we have to answer is that why? What is the source of energy? This is also a question we can answer very easily. We all know that the food we take, that is our source of energy. The food gives us energy. We take this food, we digest those food, and ultimately we get energy. Now, whenever I'll be talking about the ecosystem, we have to consider what is going on in the nature. We are humans, we are like one species, but there are different species of other animals. Their feeding habits are different. But what is the major source of energy for all this animal species is food. That food can be anything. But the second question comes, what is the source of energy for plants? So I'll just draw one thing to give a proper understanding. Suppose this is a plant. I'm drawing a plant. These are the leaves and this is a plant. Now, I have said this plant requires energy. Now, what is the source of energy for this plant? We have said that what feeds on plants, which type of animals feeds on plants? We know that they are herbivores. Herbivores, they feed on plants. And which type of animal feeds on herbivores or other animals? Those are carnivores. So carnivores will feed on herbivores. So if the carnivores needs energy, they will feed on herbivores and they will get the energy. Herbivores, if they need the energy, they will feed on the plants or the autotrophs and they will get the energy. But from where does this plant gets their energy? We know that there is a process which occurs in the autotrophs, which is not possible for possible for heterotrophs. The process is called photosynthesis. And what happens in photosynthesis? The solar energy. So, the solar energy, the energy from the sun, it gets converted, it gets fixed by the plants into a stored form of energy, which is glucose. So we can say that the solar energy from the sun gets converted into a chemical energy and that gets stored in the plants, and the plant uses that for all its metabolic processes. So I'll write it over here. From the sun the solar energy is there. The solar energy will get converted into a chemical energy in the green plants, and the other organisms, they feed on the green plants, and the part of that energy gets transferred from one organism to the other. So, can you tell me now that what is the ultimate source of energy or the main source of energy in a ecosystem? See, a ecosystem means what? It contains autotrophs, it contains heterotrophs, it contains the other organisms, and it contains the non-living components or the abiotic components, and all of these components are interacting with each other. That comprises an ecosystem. Now, what is that main source of energy for the ecosystem? If we say for the carnivores, herbivores were the source of energy. For the herbivores, plants was the source of energy. So for the plants, which is the source of energy? The main source of energy for the plants is the sun, because ultimately from the sun itself, that energy, that solar radiation, that the solar energy is getting converted into glucose or the chemical form of energy, and it is getting stored. We know we'll talk about ATP, but ultimately that glucose will get converted into ATP, and that's other metabolic processes which takes place. We will discuss that in different topic, but the main aim of this topic is that the solar energy gets converted into a chemical energy, and that gets stored in the plants, that is utilized by the plants ultimately for its source of energy. That will be taken up by the herbivores, that can be taken up from the herbivores, it will be taken up by the carnivores. So the ultimate or the main source of energy for our ecosystem is the sun. Now question arises that if sun is the main source of energy and we are talking about these green plants, does all the radiations of the sun, we know there is sun and it is giving out all that solar energy, does all the radiations of the sun which is reaching the earth useful for photosynthesis, or there is something else? So just hear my question, what I am trying to say. My question is that does all the solar radiations or the solar energy which is getting radiated by the sun, is that all that energy can be utilized by the plants for its photosynthesis process or not? That is a very interesting question, and you should be type of amazed to learn that among the total radiations of the solar energy, only 50% of the total solar incident radiations, 50%, about 50% of the total incident solar radiation can be utilized or can be utilized for photosynthesis. So not all the things can be utilized for photosynthesis, only 50% of the total incident solar radiation can be utilized for photosynthesis. That 50% of solar radiation which can be utilized for the process of photosynthesis is termed as, this 50% thing is termed as photosynthetically active radiation. This 50% of radiation which can be utilized by the plants for photosynthesis, that is called photosynthetically active radiation. In short, it is called as PAR, photosynthetically active radiations. So the first thing you should know this is that among the total incident solar radiations, only 50% can be utilized by the green plants for photosynthesis. Now, I'll just give you an information. I'm rubbing this. That what happens? Suppose this is the sun. This will give you an idea about where this solar radiations is going. I am giving approx values. So from the atmosphere, and this, let us consider this is our earth. This portion is our earth. And on the earth we have, let us say, this is some plants. So just give you an idea. So the idea is that from the sun, among the total solar radiations which is radiating from the sun, 57%, about 57% of the solar radiation, of the total solar radiation, it actually gets absorbed or scattered in the space or the atmosphere. So 57% will get scattered in the atmosphere itself. It will not reach the earth. So this is the earth. So 57% of the total solar radiation ultimately gets scattered in the atmosphere itself. They will get absorbed, they will get scattered in the atmosphere itself. And then, from the remaining which reaches the earth, 35% of the solar radiations, this is also an approx value, approximately 35% of the solar radiations, what would happen is that this will be used up for heating the land masses and the water bodies. So they are used up for heating land masses and water bodies. So this will be used up for this. So 57% of the total solar radiations will be scattered in the atmosphere. 35% will be used up for heating the land masses and the water bodies. Now from the remaining, so 57 is there and 35 is there. So 57 and 35, it comes up to 92% used up now. So remaining 8%. So from the remaining 8% of solar radiation is actually falling on the green plants. So how many? Remaining 8% is falling on the green plants. Are you getting the calculations? The calculations you should know what I have said about the calculations. So only 8% of the total light, it falls on the green plants. Although 50% of this total solar radiation can be used for photosynthesis. But from the solar radiations, only 8% falls on the green plants. Now, if you consider this 8%, from this 8% itself, most of it gets reflected. Most of it gets reflected back. It gets reflected. While touching on the green plants, it gets reflected. Some of the radiations gets transmitted. So some gets transmitted. They are not used for photosynthesis. They just fall, they just pass through. But, so how much of the total solar radiation is used up for photosynthesis now? So it is seen that about 2%, the average value, about 2% of this total, 2% of this 8%. So this 2% is normally calculated from this 8% value. So a very, very small part of this solar radiation is used up. So it can range from, I am saying it 2%, it ranges from 0.5% to 4%. So this 2%, which is the average value, that is ultimately used up for the photosynthesis purpose. So why I am saying all these things, why it is necessary? This gives you an idea that although 50% of the solar radiations can be used for photosynthesis, but a very, very tiny amount of energy is actually used up for the photosynthesis purpose. That small tiny amount of solar radiation actually helps or actually sustains the life in this planet. That small amount of solar radiation will help the plant to make their own food, which will simultaneously help the herbivores to get their source of energy. Similarly, the carnivores will also get the source of energy. So I think this idea is clear. If you don't remember these values, nothing worry. Just remember the concept that only a small part of solar radiations is used up, or it is getting used for photosynthesis purpose. Now I will put a question over here. I have said that the solar energy is the ultimate source of energy for the ecosystem. Is this sentence 100% true? Means, I just want to ask the question that, are there any ecosystem where the solar energy is not the ultimate source? For most of the ecosystems, we know that solar energy is an ultimate source of energy. Is there or are there any ecosystems in this planet where solar energy is not the ultimate source of energy? So the question is that is there any place on the earth where there is living matter, but solar energy is not present, or the sun rays cannot reach there? There are places. For example, there are some deep caves. Where the sun's rays or the light cannot reach. So if there is no sun's rays which cannot reach that place, so solar energy, there will be no such plants or no such organisms which can use that solar energy to make their own food. There can be some autotrophs. We have talked about some chemoautotrophs. There can be some bacteria which can make their own food from other chemicals. But for the ecosystems which is present in deep caves, the sun or the solar energy is not the ultimate source of energy. So these are some exceptions. We can say these are some exceptions. For most of the ecosystems, sun or the solar energy is the ultimate source of energy. But there are exceptions like deep caves where there is no sunlight, but there is an ecosystem there. So that will be an exception. But where there is an ecosystem and where solar energy is not the ultimate source of energy. There is one more example. There is deep sea hydrothermal vents, or some call it deep sea vents. So if this is a surface of the ocean, and this is from the land, let us say below the depth of the ocean, the land below the ocean, there can be some areas where there are deep vents, still deeper areas in these land masses. The sun's rays cannot reach there. Sun rays will reach somewhere up till here. It cannot reach the end portions or the deep part of the oceans. So this deep sea hydrothermal vents ecosystem is there. There are some organisms which are surviving there. But for those organisms, solar energy is not the ultimate source of energy. Okay, so what you have learned from this part, we have covered the first part, the concept of energy. We know why energy is required, why energy, we should learn this topic, why energy is needed for the ecosystem. Then we have talked about the sources of energy, what is an ultimate source of energy. And then we have talked about some exceptions where the solar energy is not the ultimate source of energy. In the second part, we'll talk about the laws of thermodynamics and how energy flows within an ecosystem. Because laws of thermodynamics is important to understand that topic. We'll talk about 2 laws of thermodynamics, and we'll also talk how actually energy flows within an ecosystem. Okay, we'll see it in the second part.